Panama for sure is one of the top retirement countries in the world, one of the best places, one of the best countries to retire to in the entire world. So that's what we're here to look at today. What exactly does Panama offer for a retiree's lifestyle? And believe me, there are many different varied lifestyle options. And we're here to discover a few of those today. So let's get into it. I think probably the top lifestyle that most people would want moving to Panama or anywhere in the tropics is the beach or island lifestyle. So let's start there. So kicking it off, Isla Contadora, which is an island in the archipelago of the Las Perlas, the Pearl Island archipelago, which is in the Pacific Ocean. So we're on the Pacific coast. Of course, Panama has two coasts, one on the Caribbean side and one on the Pacific side. So we're talking about the Pacific right now. And what's really cool about this little island is that it probably is the most developed island in the archipelago. You know, some of these, there are over 200 islands in this archipelago, so some aren't even inhabited, but some are more and less developed. Isla Contadora is probably the most developed, but it also has a fascinating history going back to the 1600s, between conquistadors and pirates. This part of the world is intensely rich in terms of history, and there's so much to be discovered here, both on the island and in the sea right off the island if you're a diver or a snorkeler. So definitely some history here, although you might not think it on a little tropical island. And it's home to a number of expats, although it's certainly not a densely populated island. There are certainly expats and several locals that would be living here. But again, very low resident population of residents that are here full time. Many people are here part time. But one of the big pulls for people, I think, to this part, the islands, this part of Panama, is the fact that it's outside of the hurricane belt. So all of Panama, in fact, is just outside of that little curve, which makes it a really wonderful place, a very safe country to move to if you're looking for a tropical haven near the equator, but you're a little bit wary or weary of extreme weather patterns. So something to keep in mind here is that this is island living without that fear, that threat of strong weather. And very safe, because it is essentially an isolated place. It's almost like a naturally gated community. You can only get there by plane or by sea. You have to have your own means to get there. So a very safe place to live. And because it is a getaway and it's more popular for part of the year and certainly with for vacation homes among locals, there are going to be high seasons and low seasons. So even between weekdays and weekends, you're going to see a lot more people. There's an influx on the weekend and an outflux for the weekdays. Holiday weekends and certainly the sunny months of the year are going to be much more busy here, and the rest of the time would be more tranquil. Moving on from islands to one of our top beach destinations on the mainland, we call it the City Beaches area. It basically extends from Chame, which is a 30 to 45-minute drive from the city, from there all the way to Rio Hato and even beyond that a little bit. We call it the City Beaches area because there are many little names for all the little towns in there and all the places that have cropped up around the resorts. But it all basically comes down to the same region for about a 45-minute stretch along that Pacific coast. Again, we're back to the Pacific. And it's extremely well developed, very high expat population. It's the quickest escape from the city, from the hustle and bustle, the traffic, the noise and the activity of the city, which means it is a popular getaway for people living in the city, which means every weekend there's a fair bit of traffic. If you leave on a Friday or you go back on a Sunday, it's not that easy to get to this part of the country. However, because of all this traffic, it's extremely well developed. You're not going to want for any services or infrastructure here. Very new buildings, condos with all the amenities you could want, ocean views, steps from the ocean. And as I said, the expat community is big, but it's also very active. So, whether it's cards or crafts, yoga, pretty much anything you can think of, happy hours, crafting circles. There is pretty much any activity that you could do here already set up. So this is a very easy community to plug into. You're not going to need to learn Spanish here necessarily if you really have a trouble with it. There are plenty of expats to get by with, and most of the locals in this part of town or this part of the country would speak some amount of English to help you get by. I don't recommend that. My recommendation is to learn the language at least as much as you're able to. But if it is a concern, this is one of the places where you can be a little less concerned. Of course, because of all this traffic, it also means that this is no longer a budget destination. The prices reflect the amount of traffic that this area gets, whether it's from foreigners or locals. And you're going to pay for the luxuries that you're seeing here. And so when you think about it, well, although it may not be an objective deal, an objective budget destination, when you compare it on the global scale, the standard of living, the little levels of luxury that you can count on here, when you compare them globally to what other prices you might pay in other countries for this kind of a beachfront lifestyle, it does actually work out to be a bargain. So always keep that in mind. Don't get too bogged down in the objective figures. Remember to keep the perspective of what you're getting for that amount of money every month. But also very accessible. This is only about an hour from Panama City, so not hard to get to. On the other end of the spectrum in Panama, of course, we do have full-blown cosmopolitan cities. So I'm going to start with Chitre, which is a lesser-known city, probably not a city that you've read a lot about or heard a lot about. It's the capital of the Herrera province, which is also on the Azuero Peninsula. It's kind of the middle of the Azuero Peninsula. And it's a rapidly growing city center and commercial center for the entire region. We call it the interior of the country. Basically, in Panama, if anything isn't Panama City, it's the interior. And you may specify by saying the coast or, the Pacific or the Caribbean side, but pretty much anything that isn't Panama City is the interior. So this is very much so the interior. There's not a lot, there's really no coastline that we're talking about here. This is really an agricultural province at its heart. But it's got all the amenities of of a metropolitan city, if that's what you're looking for. Despite its small size, despite it being much smaller than Panama, it's pretty much got all the same things to offer at a fraction of the cost and with a fraction of the amount of people and traffic and everything else that you might find annoying in Panama City. Definitely a good place to check out if you're looking for the convenience of living in a city, but not necessarily quite the inundation feeling that you get in Panama City, which is a very overwhelming city, or at least it can be. And what's interesting about Chitre is that it's constantly, in the past 10 years or so, 20 even, it's been constantly under renovation and under improvement. But things don't come to a standstill in Chitre for renovation like they do, it seems, everywhere else in the country. In the past few years alone, there have been the opening of a clinic, the reopening of an airport, and the construction of a very important bypass road that were all completed with more or less no interruption to the local communities. And there are many more projects like this on the horizon. So Chitre is definitely an up-and-comer. If you don't know about it, and this is the kind of lifestyle you're looking for, I recommend a drive over to the Azuero Peninsula to check it out. Certainly more affordable, but at the same level of convenience. Casco Viejo is my other big suggestion. It's a very personal love that I have for Casco Viejo, but it is our company-wide suggestion as well. For another version of city life in Panama. So this is in Panama City. It's technically just one neighborhood of Panama City, but it's very removed. It feels a world away. Geographically, it's its own little peninsula. It feels like a little inlet or outlet, within the city. Feels very independent, and aesthetically, it's incredibly independent. Architecturally, it's, I think, the best Panama has to offer. It's a mixture between a kind of French revival, New Orleans style, but also Spanish colonial with a lot of Art Nouveau thrown in. I mean, I can throw around names of movements, but you really have to see it to believe how gorgeous this little part of the city is. And 20 years ago, it was all but dust. It's really been in the past 20 years that this part of the city has been redeveloping in real time. So we're not losing all of these gorgeous buildings that, for a while were just skeletons or just a facade hiding an empty lot behind it. These have all been bought and developed, and they're being put to wonderful use in this part of the city. So we've got gorgeous new hotels, restaurants, stores. But this is also, I think, for me, especially the cultural heart of the city. This is where you find a cafe culture that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. This is where the art galleries and the jazz clubs and the many of the museums are, and you have a huge expat population. I would say probably the majority of people, full time residents in Casco Viejo, are probably foreigners, and a multicultural crew as well, not just Americans, but many Europeans are also finding their way to this part of the city as well. Um, excuse me. There are some downsides to it because it is a bit apart from the rest of the city. There's only one way in and out of it, more or less. It can be very crowded on weekends, especially, or in evenings. Getting the traffic going in before when you're starting your night, and then the parking once you get in there, and then trying to get out of it once you get in and you're ready to go home at 2 in the morning. It can be a real nightmare, and that's especially true for the residents. It's one thing to just be going in and out and have to deal with a bit of traffic, but if you're the resident living there and you have people honking on your street the whole time, it can be a bit of a downer on a Saturday night. So it's something to keep in mind. I would recommend staying in a hotel overnight on a street front, or get an Airbnb on a street front, so you get that feeling of what it's going to be like to live there on a weekend night when it really comes alive. Another unique lifestyle that Panama has to offer is its mountain living, highland living, which is very unique because of the climate. Everywhere else in Panama, it is hot and humid. And that is not to be taken for granted. If you don't like humidity, Panama might not be the country for you. However, there is a slight saving grace. If you love Panama, but you can't stand the humidity, or you wouldn't love to be in the heat all day, every day, there are some escapes from it, namely going to the highlands. So Boquete, number one place that comes to your head, probably to most people's heads when they think of being an expat in Panama, and certainly when it comes to spring-like climate. I think people have been talking about Boquete's spring-like climate for possibly longer than I've been alive. It is the main claim to fame. In fact, it can actually get a little cold here at night. It rains a little bit more often because you're up there in the clouds and the mountains. I mean, really, when you drive there, it feels like you drive through a cloud to get there. Stunning natural setting, just absolutely pristine, gorgeous, raw nature. But, well, actually, I shouldn't say raw. It can feel that way, but this is a pretty well developed part of the country. And so it is nice that this town has been carved out of the nature. But we're going to get to much more uncut beauty a little bit later on in the list. So I won't use those adjectives quite yet. But this is also the coffee growing part of the country. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that there's coffee on the breeze as it wafts by, but that is a big part of the land here. Many of the big plantations are coffee plantations. That's the biggest thing grown here. And so it's a fun little aspect to living here. You can go stay on a coffee farm. You can participate in, the picking at certain times of years, and some of the best coffee in the world legitimately comes from this mountaintop. So it's a very, very cool thing to be living in the heart of this coffee country. Um, the large expat contingent has been here for more than decades. In fact, it's said to go back even to the California Gold Rush, when people were migrating first north to get there and then disappointed going back south again. Many of them found Boquete along the way and decided to just set up camp. They loved it so much that they thought, why not just set up camp here? And many of the less lucky ones who went all the way north and came back disappointed took advantage of that beautiful climate and that fertile ground, and just basically set up home. So there have been expats living here for a very long time. But the community is ever growing. It is ever moving. It's a very active community and very multicultural. We're only 37 miles from the Costa Rican border here. Again, that drive takes a lot longer than it should, so don't let that fool you into thinking you can just nip across the border whenever you want to. The nearby regional capital of David would be your nearest big city. It's about 30 miles to the south, and that is a mostly direct drive. So when it comes to wanting to go to the big box store, or go out to, who knows, whatever David offers, you would want to go there, and that would be your nearest big, for example, the nearest big hospital would be there. So this isn't an easy place to access. It does take quite a few hours to get there from Panama City, and because of the roads and the mountains, when you're there, it takes quite a while to get anywhere from Boquete. So not an easily accessible part of the country, but if you do want that highland escape, it's there. But for such a remote place, you wouldn't expect it to have quite so many little luxuries, and this is all due to the foreigner population. So some of the best restaurants in the country are here. You'd be amazed at some of the little boutique stores. The level of development, I guess, of it feels like a real first world city when you're there, in terms of the services and businesses that are offered. Um, So that leads us to Boquete's counterpart, which is Santa Fe. It's still Highlands living. In fact, it pretty much offers the exact same thing as Boquete, but with much less development. So in terms of, we're talking about the climate, the fertile ground, the beautiful flowers everywhere, the bird watching, basically the same kind of lifestyle as Boquete, but at a fraction of the cost, because there are very few foreigners that have found their way to Santa Fe. It's a much smaller town. It's more remote than Boquete. It's very simple, and there's certainly not many amenities here. So not a lot to pay for. So a couple could really feasibly live here comfortably on $1,000 a month. And so for if that reason alone, it's worth looking into if you're looking at the Highlands and you can't afford Boquete, because for sure, Boquete is, again, no longer a budget destination, as I said, about the city beaches and about Panama City, so Casco Viejo. These places where people have been, setting up stakes for a long time, they come at a cost for all of those little conveniences and amenities that you're taking advantage of there. None of that is to be had in Santa Fe. This is a very unassuming, unsung little town. As I said, few people have found their way here from anywhere else in the country or world. The rainy season does last for most of the year. This is the rainforest. That's why it's called that. So from April to December, it rains every day. Not all day, but certainly every day. It's rare that it doesn't rain. That doesn't mean you won't have sun. It could be sunny all morning, and you just have a quick 20-minute monsoon-style shower in the afternoon. That's pretty typical. That's what you can expect. Sometimes the rain can last a little longer. Sometimes you can have cloudy days on end, but the weather is always warm, to say the least, whether it's raining or not. Although I will say the rain can be a little bit dangerous at times. It's a little risky if you get caught out in it. My husband and I were walking along the causeway one time, and we thought we could just manage to, push ourselves through the rain, but it became so heavy and the drops were so thick that our dog was like yelping from the pain of these raindrops hitting us, and there's not much shelter you can take underneath of a palm tree. So we ended up having to double sprinting back as far as we could to get back to the car in time. So watch out for getting stuck in the rain, even if it is warm out still. It's no joke. And don't forget the flooding. There's also going to be plenty of flooding if you're in Panama City, especially. So look out for that. And, it's not typical. It's not every single day, and it is getting better. Drainage systems are getting improved. But you can definitely wade through water in Panama City if you get caught on a bad street. Speaking of this, the kind of climate, this part of the world, we're on the equator. Not a lot changes on the equator. You might not have thought too much about it beyond being on your vacation, but there aren't seasons. You might start to miss seasons. I lived in Panama for 7 years, and I really did miss seasons by the time I left. What I do really miss about Panama, though, and being on the equator, is the length of day never really changes. And I guess it can be a good thing or a bad thing. I loved waking up with the sun around between 6 and 6:30 every morning. It did get dark early, so that is kind of a shame. You kind of got home from work, and it felt like nighttime already. But I really enjoyed the consistency of those hours. It made it easy to plan things, and I have had to get used to having difference in daylight hours here in France, which is much different. So things to keep in mind about living on the equator. Permanent residency, it's a great backup plan. It might not be something that you've thought a lot about. If you're just thinking about in terms of lifestyle, living in Panama is a great place to live, great place to retire. But it's also a great place just to act as a plan B if you are thinking that you might want to, not always live in the United States. The way that coronavirus has taught us that you always want to have multiple ways to get into a country. With all those border restrictions we experienced in the past few years, it became very clear to people that you couldn't always count on, being a citizen of a country to get in, or to, that you could be stranded somewhere, or that you might not want to stay in the country if there are certain regulations that are being enforced there that you don't agree with. If you have a ticket to another country and a visa to get in, it's a great backup plan to have. So Panama offers a really great residency program, many great residency programs. And depending on which route you take, you could gain permanent residency, which is great because once you have it, once you've obtained it, you only have to go back to Panama every couple of years. Just, go in if you've moved away, for example. So you live in Panama, you're a resident, but then you decide to move away again. You only have to go back once every 2 years, take a quick vacation, and you have effectively renewed your status. And so you can't, as long as you're making those visits, they can't take that residency away from you. So you'll always have a way into Panama and another place to go if you don't like where you are.
From Harry M. Is it currently possible for an American citizen to open a bank account in Panama without a Panama address?
Yes and no. It depends on the bank. Panama banks are always changing their rules, their internal rules, who they're willing or what documents they need to open an account. And so I've given up on recommending banks in Panama. I think we have between us for the businesses, various businesses, and personal accounts, we're working with at least 3 banks still, maybe 4.
Over the years, we must have worked with a dozen.
Yeah, we've had accounts closed because we're U.S. citizens, or because for our business the revenue comes from the U.S., because Panama is very concerned in the last few years, especially about their money laundering outlook, how the U.S. views Panama reputation, in Panama, and the individual banks. So yes, you can open an account without a Panama address. Most Panama banks want to see some connection to Panama. So if you're getting residency or buying property, even without getting residency, that will make it easier. Or if you have a big chunk of change that you want to move down there, if you have $250,000, the private banking side of most banks will happily open an account for you without a Panama address.
Okay, I think the bottom line response here is there's no good banking choice in Panama. There are a lot of banks in Panama. It is an international banking haven, or a hub, I guess.
Right.
And
we've had people who say, "Oh, I've gotten great service out of XYZ Bank," when I've said, that we haven't. It depends on the branch manager. Branch managers change, so you can find that customer service changes. The one thing to remember, though, is whatever bank you're going to try to open an account with in Panama, you'll have to go in person. They all require a know your client personal interview.
Okay, that's a really good question on the topic of banking offshore. There are very few places that don't. We have published a banking report recently, for example, that did a review, a roundup of banks around the world. And that's one important point to understand, because there aren't many options for opening an offshore account these days that don't require a personal interview. But there are some that are highlighted in the report.
Great healthcare, especially in Panama City. In the rest of the country, you're going to need to check the local facilities. Don't take them for granted. Make sure that you can get to them, that they're within whatever your comfortable radius would be, whether that's 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, depending on your health. So when you're in the interior, just make sure if wherever you're setting up your house, make sure that you're comfortable with whatever the local health services are. But if you are in the city, a lot of people harp on about the American hospital there, which is fantastic. It is great. It's Johns Hopkins affiliated Punta Pacifica Hospital, but it is much more expensive than all of the other hospitals in the city, and it's not necessarily any better. I mean, it is, it does have the Johns Hopkins affiliation. It does have great accreditations, great ratings. I'm not saying it's a bad hospital by any stretch. But you can get excellent care from the doctors in the other hospitals as well for sometimes a fraction of the price. So it's something to keep in mind. No matter where you are, though, whether you're in the interior, in the city, whatever hospital you're in, meds, any kind of medications, prescriptions, over-the-counter stuff is very, very cheap, and it's all very familiar. Again, I'm here in Europe now where the medications and the pharmacies aren't familiar when you go in, but over there in Panama, you go in, all of the brands are, more or less the same. You're going to be able to recognize most of the over-the-counter drugs. Prescriptions, make sure you know the generic name, the pharmaceutical name of whatever it is. And if you don't know, if you can't find it, you just ask the pharmacist, and they might not know by its name in the U.S., whatever name it's branded as there. It might have its own brand in Panama, but they'll be able to find it very easily, and it'll very likely be a fraction of what you pay in the U.S. Spanglish is very common. We have a few examples up here for you. Fren, Wachiman, Porcon, Windshield Wiper, and Cool and Pretty are all used in conversation pretty regularly in Panama. The Spanglish comes through in a lot of different ways down there, so look out for it when you're learning Spanish and trying to speak Spanish. Another really cool thing that's come about since I moved is this app Pedidos Ya. You can have basically, as I understand it, anything delivered, anything in the city, from takeout to groceries to drinks to medicine from the pharmacy to pet products, and they'll even run errands for you, like dropping off, picking up packages, things like that. So basically a really excellent courier service that you can just order on your app. You'll need to download WhatsApp living in Panama City. Living in anywhere in Panama. WhatsApp is the main form of communication. If you don't know it already, get familiar with it. It's an app that you'll download on any smartphone. It is a pretty common method of communication all around the world now, and I'd say I probably use WhatsApp more than any other communication service that I have on my phone, and I live in France now, but that became true in Panama, and in Panama they take it to another level entirely. My dentist, my doctor would send me updates telling me that I needed to come in for an appointment or asking if I could change my appointment via text. And they would expect just a text in reply. So it's a different level of professionalism than you might be used to, but get used to it. WhatsApp is by far and away the main method of communication in Panama. Not a handicapped-friendly country. Unfortunately, it's just not. There's no way to really say it otherwise. The city in particular is not handicap-friendly. You can't count on ramps. There are lots of cracks in the sidewalk. Holes, manhole covers missing, this is going back years now, but definitely I know many stories of people who have fallen and had severe injuries in Panama City or in other cities in Panama because of, huge cracks in the sidewalk that weren't covered over, or tree roots growing out of nowhere, or in my case, one time I was walking home in the dark from a yoga class. Well, it wasn't totally dark, but it was at night, and I was coming home from a yoga class, and crossing the street, I didn't notice that there were some electrical cables that had fallen down right around the height of my neck. So I walked into them. It was like a little noose that I walked into before I caught myself and managed to get out of it. So be aware of your surroundings, and it's definitely not a place for those with mobility issues. If you can't get around on these kinds of pavements, then it might not be a great choice for you. Be careful when you're renting. This one's definitely important. If you are going to rent short-term or long-term, and we do recommend, no matter what, whether you intend to buy eventually or not, always rent first. Always make sure that you vet your neighborhood, even the street that you're on, before you make too many commitments and get in too deep. But when it comes to renting in Panama, especially if you're going through any kind of classified system, it's very risky. I've known so many people personally who have come down to Panama to, and they start working for us at Live and Invest Overseas, and we start warning people after a while, because we had so many people come in and say that they had an incident with a rental through the newspaper or through Craigslist online or whatever it is. And they had gone to see the apartment in some cases they hadn't. In some cases, they had gone to see it though, but didn't get the keys, were supposed to meet later, but had already given the deposit. But there are so many ways in which you could be scammed through a false rental listing in Panama. So whatever you do, if you are going to do rentals, Make sure that you see the place for yourself and that you get the keys, and you know the keys are to that apartment that you saw or that house that you saw, not a different one. And don't hand over any money until you get both of those things. You will need a car when you're living in Panama, even if you're living in the city. It is a pretty small city. It's compact, and there is a metro there, and there are bus lines, but pretty much to live comfortably in Panama City, you're going to need a car. The metros don't run necessarily to all the places that you would need to get to, so it would be a little bit inconvenient if you tried to rely just on the metros and the bus. You'll definitely be more comfortable in a car. And if you're outside the city, you pretty much always need a car because everything is going to be a little bit further than walking distance, and buses are going to take too long. So speaking of transportation, if you are in the city just visiting, we recommend using Uber or one of the other ride-sharing systems other than taxis instead of taxis. The taxis are not great there. They're not super well regulated. The cars can be in pretty bad condition. They are getting a little bit better now that they have some competition from all the ride-hailing companies, but still, you're almost always going to be charged more by a taxi than you would by an Uber, and some of the newer companies are even cheaper. I've heard InDriver is one of the cheaper options right now. There's also Didi and Cabify. And especially coming from the airport, if this is your first time visiting Panama, don't get a taxi from the airport. You'll be charged $30 $30 as opposed to maybe $10 using Uber. So look out for that when you arrive.